Our first additional language, it is semester 2. Today is the 12th of August. It is now 1:30, although it's quite a bleak day in P after the lovely warm day that I shared with you yesterday when I did my opening and welcome. Okay, so today we're going to start our first lecture, week 1, which is the use of grammar. You'll like that, and structure in the classroom. And so I'm going to share my screen with you, and then I just want to chat to you a bit about semester 1 results, okay? There we go. Let's just put it on slideshow. Okay, stop doing that now. So let's go again. There we go. Okay, let's start on the screen. It's okay, that's fine. So you can see unit 1, the first unit, is going to looking at teaching language structure and use in the first additional classroom. Things that you're all very excited about. I know a lot of you think of grammar as you traditionally have possibly been taught, looking at tenses, concord, verbs, prepositions. However, we don't look at language teaching like that anymore. It's integrated, it's inductive, it's based on text, but we'll get to that just now. First of all, just regarding the assignment 5, the online tracking quiz, the marks were not entered correctly. I have now submitted all my mark amendment forms to my head of department. It goes from there to the dean, who has to sign and verify that everything is fine, and then only will I be able to enter the marks. This is the same for all the SOAs, for all the mark adjustments we have to do. I have to do forms for every single one of them, and I've done about 75 mark queries, so it's been quite a long process. Please be patient, and please know that everything I share with you will actually be inputted on my Embury. It will not be done overnight because we have to go through this process, so please take note of that. Don't email me and say, when is my marks haven't changed? They won't change. Everything will have to go onto the system, and I think the marks will only be refreshed on the system once everybody has completed their SOAs, all our mark adjustments have done for the whole of Stadio. Everything has been entered. The final meetings have taken place, and then the final mark release must probably happen maybe about, I think it's about the 13th of September. So everything else is provisional until then. But I promise you, everything that you have queried, I have answered you. Where the marks have changed, they will change on my Embury. Okay, please believe me and please trust me. Right, let's get on today's lecture and let's see how we go with this first learning event of semester 2. Okay, I asked you yesterday in my welcome and introduction video how you were feeling. Okay, I thought many of you would be feeling very terrible from all the emails I've got, but surprisingly, when you told me how you were feeling, and I was wondering, I quickly went and had a look at Menti just now, and I was quite excited to see that many of you, the biggest word, were actually excited and happy. I expected worried, anxious, angry, but I'm quite encouraged by this, so that it seems like there's these 10 of you that are going to be quite keen to get started with semester 2 and are feeling quite happy about it. I understand that you're feeling worried, frustrated, you're also feeling determined and proud and fantastic. Concerned, I understand. Anxious, I understand. But I'm very glad there's a very powerful feeling of positivity coming through, which to me that is so encouraging. I've also said the Kahoot, which is based on my opening and welcome. It's a little fun quiz, and you've got until the 16th, I think it is, to actually complete that. Whereas you've only got until Friday night to complete your Menti if you want to do it, okay? It just gives everybody an indication how everybody else is feeling. Okay, right. So let's just have a look where we are, what we did in semester 1 and what we're going to do in semester 2. We've got listening and speaking, which were covered in semester 1, as well as the reading and the viewing, which you did for your genre task, where you had to design an activity and a marking guide for 4 different genres, depending if you were SP or FET. This semester, the purple semester, you're going to look at language use and structures and how we actually teach these conventions in a way that is integrated, inductive, not teacher-centered, and not rule-based. And we're going to look at writing, which is quite exciting. It's my favorite and it's my passion as well. How do we write? What is the process of writing? What are the different genres for writing? Transactional writing, essay writing, and then also look at critical language practices and awareness. How do we show bias? How do we show inclusion? How do we show exclusion, which is so important in the way language is used? And that brings me the whole notion of politeness. When you address people professionally, to always be polite, to address them by their names, to give them the context, to end off in a very nice way, which is all very professional. Attitude and the way things are done are so important. And this is all part of critical language awareness, which CALP actually stresses. Okay, so we're going to write on and move on. So unit 1, as I've said tonight, this afternoon, we're going to look at the importance of language teaching and structure. And I know many of you are concerned about language use. And if you look at this little cartoon, language give many problem. And we can see straight away there's a concord error there, not verb and subject agreement. Its grammar gives many problems. Okay, so we get concerned with that. But if you understood that, basically that's fine. Not if you're going to write an academic essay, but if you said that to someone, they would understand what you were saying. And this will follow, that is Ferreira chapter 13, where you'll find all the information relating to this. And then we'll follow through on grammar teaching strategies next week, looking at resources, and then how we assess grammar as well, which will lead on to your assignment 4, I think 3 it is, yes, where you'll be designing a language exam. Okay. Right, your prescribed readings. Again, it's your CAPS document for FET or SP, as well as our dear friend Ferreira. Yes, she accompanies us all the time. And I think all of you have got the text now, which is like quite a relief, as well as our recommended reading, CALEEN, language strategies for quality teaching and learning. I think some of you have got CALEEN, so I might also be referring to CALEEN as well this semester. Right, so let's look what CAP says about language teaching. And this all comes from the document. You can go and check up and make sure that I'm telling the truth when I say this. First of all, they say language learning is text-based. If you think about the tense exercise with the case study 1, which was assignment 1, they had a list of different tenses which they had to complete. That is not text-based. Text-based means it's got to come from a book, a reading, a listening exercise. It's got to be related to a visual possibly as well. So these are things we need to look at if we are going to study language. It's not isolated activities. So it's often taught in an integrated manner, using a text, using a book, using a visual, using a film, however you're going to use this to teach the grammar, and we'll look at some of these this afternoon. It's mediated. That means the teacher helps and scaffolds the students to the understand, taking them through different exercises so they know exactly how they can actually approach grammar and language. It's learner-centered and communicative. In a lot of you in your lesson plans, the teacher is up in the front, conducting the lesson, saying everything. Poor students are sitting passively and listening a lot of the time, not involved in group work, not involved in discussion. The teacher takes over all the time. This is a very traditional approach. We've got to move on to students discovering what the tenses are, students discovering what the prepositions are, them working out what the rules are without you telling them. Right, so what is the style of your language teaching? Maybe it's like your teachers, how they taught you. Is it collaborative? Are you encouraging students to answer questions, giving them all a chance to speak? Remember, authentic speaking is so important. Getting them to communicate, getting them to use language in the classroom. Or is it you, wah, 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 wah? Okay, telling them the rules. And there you can see the typical response of your students, not learning, not being proficient in what is actually happening. And so be careful of being too teacher-centered, asking all the questions, controlling everything, rather than giving your students time to learn and to proficiently use the language. So from Ferreira, it also says language study is best done in context, not isolated. So in the context of learning, reading a piece of text, of looking at an advertisement, how are we going to learn the language? Okay, so whenever you hear me writing there, not an isolated rule-based activity, it's not, it's integrated with what you're doing in the text. So that means that your specific language study items, like your tenses or parts of speech, are part of the text that they're reading. So if it's a report, everything will be in the past tense, and in this way they can see what the past tense is and how they can use it. If it's conclusions, it's often written in the present tense, and you can give them different examples so they can go and study how the tense is used when they are reporting, past tense, or when they're concluding something, present tense. Same with other directed, indirect speech, passive and active. We can do the same thing. It must be part of a text, okay, not isolated. So if they're producing, it's speaking or writing, production, all right? So if I'm speaking, I must use the text and the language, or if I'm writing it. This is why it's often good to consolidate your lesson plans with some kind of writing, that they can make a list, they can summarize a paragraph, they can comment on what worked for them, what didn't work for them, and that's when they are producing something. Or they are encountering something, they're getting some input that can be through listening to something or reading something to identify things in that context. Can they identify direct speech from a listening exercise? Can they identify the use of figurative language from a reading exercise? Those are things you have to consider. So we're going back to question. This is your second language acquisition theorist, looking at input and output. What do you give your students and what do you expect them to produce, their production? So you've got to have suitable pre-listening or pre-reading activities before they listen or read a story. So you can't just expect them to listen without scaffolding them and showing them what they should listen for. Don't just say listen. You say listen for positive ideas, listen for negative ideas. What about the pre-reading? What about the context? What about the vocab? What's happening? Give them those pre-listening, pre-reading activities before you can expect them to know how to listen or how to read the story. When they understand in the target language, that's English, they are exposed to comprehensible input. So when they understand the story, when they understand what they're listening to, they are now experiencing comprehensible input. I think from many of my instructions on the assignments, it seems no one understands. So I'm not giving you comprehensible input. I've got to scaffold you more from what I read in the reflections on how to understand what you must do. And I'm going to be very mindful of that with your assignment 1, which is based on a grammar activity this semester, that I'm going to try and scaffold you more so that you actually understand what the requirements are for the assignment. So I have to learn as well. So then once they've got this comprehensible input that they understand in the target language, then they can hear or read the story with understanding. And this is what Krashen wants them to do. So you have got to give them this opportunity to experience through pre-listening, pre-reading, get the input. So if you give them 1 plus 2, that's too hard and they're not going to be able to do it. So that's when you just say to them, listen. And you say, okay, what did you listen to? You haven't scaffolded them. You haven't said, listen for negative comments. You've got to give them just 1 I plus 1, which means you can just take them to the next level so they can actually understand. If you give them 0 current level of competence, it's not actually going to work because they're not going to understand and they're going to fall asleep. So you shouldn't give them nothing. You should encourage them as well. So what is your output? What do you expect them to produce from what you've given them? Maybe they're going to do a concept map. Maybe they're going to do a comic. Maybe they're going to do a diagram. Once they've done a poem or a graph, you know that they've got the output as well. So prior knowledge is very, very important for this. So they've got to actually know what the prior, their context is, what was prior for their knowledge as well. So without that prior knowledge, without testing what they know, what words they know, what vocab they know about the context, they cannot learn new things. So if you don't give them a build-up, and this is what you also had to do in your genre activities for assignment 3, you had to say what the prior knowledge was, and many of you just didn't do that. How do they know what the poetic elements are that they need to look at? How do they know what figures of speech they need to know? How do they know what the different genres of the story are if you haven't made that prior knowledge more overt? You've got to go back and explain and say what the prior knowledge was that you expect them to know so they can complete this task, be it on full study, advertising, image, whatever you're expecting them to do in your genre activities. So learning is a process of making sense of new information. And I know it's hard to make sense of new information because it's not part of your context or your situation, what you know. So even me expecting you to know all these concepts is difficult because possibly you don't know it. And it's a process of learning these new ideas and then applying it to what you know. So how am I expecting you to teach language compared to what you have experienced in the classroom? This might be quite alien for many of you, and it might be quite difficult. It might be I+2, which makes it very hard for you. So all your academic learning will be not meaningful, what you're trying to teach them, unless your activities are embedded in the learner's prior knowledge, so you're sure you know what they know, and then you can start moving into new knowledge as well. So you first got to establish what prior knowledge is. Okay, this is quite interesting. This is CALP's learning styles. We all started, you see these 4 little blocks here, we all started different places, but we should actually complete the whole thing. So if you look at the arrows now, learner experience is the center of learning. So what do they know? What do they understand? What is their prior knowledge is most important. And this might come from concrete experience, things that they're feeling, things that they've experienced. They know how to go online and register to be vaccinated. So they've got their complete understanding. They feel happy with that. They feel quite confident with that. Some of them might start with observing and reflecting, which is more watching what people do. So you might have this concrete experience of actually having done something, but maybe I can also learn a lot by watching other people, copying them as they demonstrate. I can learn a lot from that. Then I can possibly learn to the more abstract. So once I've got the concrete experience, I've watched others do similar things, I can learn more abstract things, the context reduced type of information. But I can't start there, the context reduced or abstract learning, if my students haven't got the concrete experience of something, or they haven't modeled or watched or demonstrated something. And then they can move to the doing part, which is being able to give the output. They can draw that graph, they can do a mind map, they can write a summary. So they've got to go through all these different aspects to be able to arrive at where they should. So just be mindful of that. Don't just shove them in at the deep end. I think I sometimes shove you at the deep end. I'm sorry about that, but I should take you more from where you are and mold you to that other experience. Okay. So to learn something, students need to do something. So that's why in your lesson consolidation, don't just ask them a question, get them to do something. Get them to write something, get them to model something, get them to present something. So get them something to do. Otherwise, they're just going to fall asleep. Okay, they have to learn, they've got to do. The active experience, the doing part is so important. So, on grammar rules, you might think about this, comprehensible input or output. So if I know all the rules about tenses, and I know all the rules about indirect and direct speech, or passive and active, and all the figures of speech, have I got comprehensible input? So these are grammar rules. Grammar rule 1, a complete sentence must include a noun and a verb. For instance, the bird flew. Or number 3, the only exception to the rules above is the imperative sentence, which is the command, go away. Now, if you know all those grammar rules, do you think you're going to be a proficient speaker? If you can output them, if you can recite them, does that make you a better scholar? Is that going to make you a better teacher? Is that going to make you more proficient in the language? I have taught tenses to grades 8 to 12, and they still write bad essays. Do I say they have acquired those rules to make them write better or speak better? I don't think so. Okay, so that's a big cross. No, you don't need grammar rules. Grammar rules are not comprehensible input. So it's not getting work from a book. Your grammar rules are not going to make you a better language writer or speaker or proficient in the language. There's nothing interesting either about rules of parts of speech or third person singular. Knowing those rules, it's not going to make your students very excited, I don't think. they're going to fall asleep in the classroom like that. It's so boring. Rules are never heard outside a language classroom. Interestingly, when you make an error, when you're speaking, no one's going to say that's not the rule that you're doing. Okay, they're not going to say anything about the rules that you're following. That is not the Concord rule for first person singular. Okay, that's not going to make you more proficient. So rules are not going to give you comprehensible input. So the traditional grammar-based teaching that you possibly have come from, research has shown that understanding of grammar rules is very fragile. It means it's meaningless. It's going to break very quickly and soon be forgotten, according to Krashen. So I can pump these rules into my students and think they're going to know the language by that, but they are not. It's a very fragile structure. It's going to break and fall down. Again, we're going to the tip of the iceberg. There's the grammar rules right at the top. It quickly melts. This is what Krashen says. Traditional instruction, which focuses on grammar and output, it's at the tip, okay? And this construction quickly melts away. So it's soon forgotten. So let's get rid of those rules and not be rule-based in our teaching. Going back to Cummins. Cummins is going to come up all the time. Basic language proficiency, which is our BICS, conversational, it's all surface learning. It's the top of the iceberg. There's that iceberg again. So BICS is basic interpersonal communication skills. Remember, Olani, you could speak very well, but couldn't write or read properly. This all is to do with pronunciation, vocabulary, grammar, that type of teaching. So you give them that, they're not going to get the CALP, the cognitive academic language proficiency. That's not going to happen. BICS is not CALP proficiency. So they're not going to write better because they know different grammar rules. They're going to have to get the more analytical, evaluative, writing summaries. The functional use of language is going to give them the CALP, not the conversational. So how do we acquire CALP? Okay, this is a language that comes from reasoning stuff. It's a more complex and difficult things, problem solving, oh, this is so exciting, general academic writing discourse, all the more difficult things, but this gives you CALP, the cognitive academic language proficiency. So just getting your students to sit and answer a question, it's not going to give you CALP, okay? It's when you give them the what question, which you don't know the answer to, maybe you're leading a bit to the CALP, okay? So to acquire CALP, you've got to have an extensive vocab. So sometimes vocabulary building is important. So get them to work on vocab, conceptual understanding of how discourse is used in the classroom, structures, and give them different articles to decontextualize and break up. And that will actually help them as well. So here again, Cummins' iceberg theory, BICS, is the language necessary for day-to-day living, the quick chats, okay? Very informal, which includes conversations with friends, informal interaction. There's very easy chats that we can have. This is all the BICS. It's concrete type of speaking. You don't have to make complex sentences. You can incomplete sentences. It's fine. Informal registers. Context embedded. People know what you're talking about. They can see your nonverbal expression. They don't even have to hear the words. Whereas CALP is the context reduced. It's so abstract. There's no nonverbal clues. They have to know what the vocab is. They have to understand the sentence structures. And in this way, they can get more of the cognitive academic language proficiency. Okay, it's to understand and discuss content in the classroom, and they don't always they don't always see the nonverbal in that. So input processing, yes, same as I've got to push you, you've got to push your students into process input, and so it becomes part of the linguistic system. You've got to take them to that I+1, just more than they know all the time, not too hard, but build them up all the time. So immerse them, that means let them swim in texts, in books, in newspapers, in visual literacy, to a range of grammatical structures and words, and this will give them comprehensible input. So always have a text that you are working from. Many texts, different texts, all your genres are different texts. Let them be exposed to this. And this will promote better understanding of language usage. than any rules will. So they will start to gain an understanding of how you can use language by that. I know with Zulu, you say ufuna, the pronoun can be male or female. How do you acquire knowing when to say he or she? One of my students once in grade 9 came and said to me, Marcel, I actually know how to use he and she now because now I understand. And this was by grappling with many, many texts using he and she. And so she learned to say he or she correctly instead of mixing up the he's and she's in English. Just a little example. So the whole comprehensible umbrella of input means to talk about movies, to embed reading in everything that you've done, to talk about pictures, to read and discuss things, to listen and to draw something. So it's all those practical applications that you need. The output is needed by talking and becoming involved with what you're doing. And my friend, Albert Einstein, says, never memorize what you can look up in a book. So if I can look up a rule in a book, why must I memorize it? Why must I rote learn in it? We have to have structured input for proficiency, but it's not based on a knowledge of rules. So research indicates that proficiency improves when teachers encourage discussion. We're talking about grammatical items. The learners have read, heard, or spoken. So they've had the pre-listening, they've had the pre-reading. We can talk about it. And in this way, it's going to encourage that whole proficiency of language. And I'm going to show you a few examples of how to do this. So we've got to push our learners. Okay, it's not just going to happen automatically, miraculously. I'm going to have to learn to push you so you can understand what to do in the assignments. So they can process these by a structured input in our learner-centered classes. So I'm not doing all the talking as teacher. The students are actually discovering what they need to learn. Okay, so let's look at input processing. 15 grammar rules which it's okay to break. And yeah, we've got ending a sentence with a preposition. The rule is that you must never end a sentence with a preposition. So they say it's quite old-fashioned to have to say, from where do you come? Okay, which is like very academic. You should rather say, where do you come from? What's wrong with ending a sentence with a preposition? Split infinitives, when you say to run, to slowly run. That is a rule that you shouldn't break. And yet it makes sense to say, to run slowly is fine, but to slowly run. You understand what I'm saying? The next one is never begin a sentence with a conjunction. Don't start a sentence with and, okay, or but. However, this is a rule that can also be broken. And the example they give you is, and that lends me on to my next point. So if it makes sense within that, and then I go on to my first point is this, or my next point is that, it's a full sentence to follow. So it's okay, really, it's okay to start a sentence with and or but or so or if it makes sense and the meaning is not lost. Okay, so I'm giving you permission to break rules as long as meaning is not lost. So let learners discuss language in terms of understanding it and with socially interacting in their discussion. So it mustn't be students sitting isolated, listening to the rules. They must be actually working in a situation where they are socially interacting with all these rules, not rules as such, but how language works. So yes, first example, how do I present the present perfect tense? Do you all know what present perfect tense is? If you know your rules, you should know that. That's using have or has, okay? He has gone to town. We have eaten our lunch. When does that actually occur? How do we actually address this in the classroom? Do we teach them that rule? So learners can construct sentences containing information about, this is how we can do it. So they're going to construct sentences later about containing this information about, first of all, where do they live? Okay, I live in Port Elizabeth, I live in Summer Strand. How long have I lived there? I've lived here 40 years. Okay, so that's a long time. So they will make sentences. I live in Durban, I live in Polokwane, I live in Limpopo, I've lived there for 20 years, 15 years, there's my house, okay. They can also choose to stay in the imaginary place. Okay, I live in New York, I live in London, I've lived there for 1 year, so it's make it quite imaginative as well. What will they need? They will need a picture of a house, so they can look through that for magazines. Okay, find a picture of the house. This can be imaginary, doesn't have to be the house. And then 3 random past dates, 1920, 1918, 1930, or 2030. Okay, so they just choose any random dates. So what have they got now? They've got a sentence saying where they live. They've got a sentence saying how long they have lived there. They've got their picture of their house, and they've got 3 random dates. So that's what they've got to do. They've got to read the past dates that they've provided and decide on which of those dates they moved to this place with their families. Okay, so they can choose any date. So when they say 1918, okay, they can use that and make it fictitious as well. Here's the house. They can choose any kind of house they like. There's like a type of container, I think, that's turned into a house. There's a very nice house as well. So they can choose, go through magazines, choose any kind of house, or their own house if they want to as well, tent, maybe. Then use your correct address or use any address, okay, where you live. So you also need that information. Write a sentence stating where you live and when you moved into your house. You've got to use the word since in your sentence. So it could be something like this. Since we moved into our new home at 23 Kai Road in July 2021, we have walked to school. Okay, so if they've got all those, and they've got to try and turn it into a sentence using the word since, and let them play around with it. They've got to have an address, they've got to have a date, and they've got to use since, and see if they can put that sentence together about their house. Then they read the sentence to their class or to their peers, and then they read a passage after this in which the present perfect tense is used. So they've actually created their own sentence using the present perfect. Then they're going to use a whole text structure showing the use of this tense. So this is their sentence. Since we moved into our new home at 23 Kai Road in July 2021, we have walked to school. So the rule, there's the rule now. You can maybe go into it now. When you're talking about the present perfect, it's an activity that started in the past and is continuing or might still be continuing into the present. So they moved in on the 23rd in July 2021, and now they are still walking to school. So it's continued into the present. So that's what the present perfect means. We use has or have, depending on singular or plural, and we use a past participle that goes with it. We have walked to school. Right, and then you can have a passage. This is about Sino. 6 months have passed since then. Okay, it's using the word since again. Sino has exercised, okay, singular, and has and the past participle every day, and has shed, still in the present perfect, 15 kilograms. It's happening to the past, coming into the future, and has bought new clothes. He has changed his diet and only eats vegetables, fish, and fruit now. He has made new friends and spent time helping others. Really a change in Sino. Although he has been busy, Sino has been making time to continue his PGCE studies. Okay, so you can go through all those examples, look at the present perfect, got present perfect continuous there as well in the last sentence, and then you can get them to practice their own passage about what has happened in the last 6 months in their lives. So they are applying, they are writing 6 months have passed since I, whatever. All right. So what about teaching grammar inductively? That means that they are discovering the rule. So I'm not telling them rule. How can they learn inductively what the different rules are? And they often learn this by observing different examples, giving them the example like Sino, and they must now discover the rule on how it should be used. So always use real text, pictures for your language study. And this is now an example of how you can use pictures to learn about preposition use. And I'm using mask. This is quite topical. We're all wearing masks, different types of masks. Stop AU coronavirus 19, that's when that happened. Here's a different kind of mask here. There's a mask there. If you can read this, you're too close. So we can look at masks, and then we can get them to check preposition use from it by asking different questions. Where is the mask worn? Okay, so you might say on the face. Okay, for instance, maybe what is the preposition? Where is the mask placed? Okay, over the nose and mouth. Over is your preposition. Why is the mask worn? Okay, to protect from, okay, from the virus. Where do you store your masks at home? Where do you pack your mask? In the drawer, under my socks, okay? All examples of preposition use. Where do you buy your masks? At the supermarket, at Discount, at Clicks, okay? So the use of at, all right? And then where can masks be discarded? In the bin, right? On top of my wardrobe, okay? Under the dresser, in the washing basket, okay? So those are different ways you can actually practice preposition use, and they can see the type with questions and the use of masks, and they can see where the direction is going with preposition use. What about pictures? To learn about adjectives, how can we use pictures? So what you can do is you can show them a lot of pictures, and they can write down the name of an object or an abstract noun or both of them. So yeah, we've got girls playing netball. What objects can they see? They can see the netball post, the nets, the ball, the bibs that they're wearing. Abstract nouns might be happy, sad, angry, cross, all the things they might be feeling on the netball field. Same as sport. I'm doing a bit of sport now because I think a lot of people enjoy sport. What objects can they see? The soccer ball, the lines in the field, the crowd. What are the abstract nouns they can see here? Determination, focus, joy, frustration, all the things they could see there. What about this hockey match? They can see the hockey stick. They can see the hockey ball. They can see the different bibs that they're wearing, the shoes. What are they seeing in abstract noun form? Determination, defense. They can do 2 for each picture, possibly. Cricket, if you like cricket. Elation, the abstract noun. Thrill, they thrilled. Pleasure. What other words? I think just anticipation, thrilled, victorious. Okay, elated. And you've got the cricket bat, and you've got the gloves, and you've got all the different kit that they're wearing. Then they're going to write down adjectives to describe the noun. So if they've got cricket bat, what adjective can they use to describe the cricket bat? And it might be a hard cricket bat. I'm not a cricketer. Or a professional cricket bat, or white cricket bat, right? There's the wickets. Okay, what can they use to describe the wickets? Then to write a paragraph using the adjectives to describe the nouns that they've selected. So they've taken one picture, they've got 5 nouns, they've got 5 adjectives, and now they must write a little paragraph using the nouns and the adjectives. So they can use pictures to understand parts of speech. You don't have to tell them, they will now work out what it is. What about the Olympics? It's just happened now in Tokyo. It's not, I've got 2021, but also 2020. Again, what are the abstract nouns that are being experienced here? Okay, determination, agony, frustration. Here's another one. What abstract nouns? She's airborne, she's beautiful, she's, what's this abstract? She's competent, okay. Yeah, again, it's elation, pride. Those are the abstract nouns you could possibly find there. Yeah, what have we got here? What are the abstract nouns here? I'm trying to think of what it could be. They are loving each other. I know the abstract noun is pleasure, joy that they would be feeling. What is she feeling? This is Hassan. She's feeling, I think, again, elation, triumph, joy. And what about this for the soccer players? What are the abstract nouns here? And then you could take all these abstract nouns and you could write a paragraph about them. So you could take one of these pictures, identify the nouns, identify abstract nouns as well, and then write something about it. Okay, continue with pictures to learn how to construct a sentence. So here you've got a set of instructions. Look at the illustration and describe what is happening in it. Okay, so here's your illustration. In one sentence, describe what's happened to the soccer player. He's hugging his legs because he has injured his shin. Okay. He's leading his friend off the field because he has hurt his foot. Okay, something like that. The referee is blowing the whistle because she is kicking the ball out of bounds. Okay, I don't know. Jackson is thrilled because he has beat the pack and covered his distance to the finish line. Okay, so a sentence to describe what is happening. Then you can change this into a question saying, what happened here? So change the statement. What happened to Jackson in this picture? Why did the person hold his leg? When did this happen? Where was the event taking place? So you can change this statement into a question that you've just completed. So what about language errors that people make all the time? Why do people keep on making incorrect things? How do we work with this? So instead of getting to write out the correct form of the errors, teachers can make use of a reference number system. This is quite interesting. So underline the errors and write a number to say what the rule was. So for instance, learners will learn to look at the explanations and understand the reasons why their work is wrong then. And then they can maybe even speak to their friends to discuss if they've corrected the error correctly or if it's still incorrect. So they can do a bit of peer work with that, which is a much better way than teachers just marking it wrong. So here's an example. Yesterday, the man panicked when he see there was too little time left. Okay, the teacher's written there 7, 12.4, and 9 as errors. So the explanations are provided. For 7, it says verbs ending in C, the suffix, the K must be used. I can't see under my picture when suffixes begin with a vowel or added. So that's the panic part when it ends in the C. How do we finish off the word? 12.4 is this is the simple past tense, describe the action that has happened at some time in the past. Which one does that refer to? And the last one is how to use to or to. Okay, you went to time, preposition. You went to is an adverb of degree. I want to do it is part of your infinitive to do. So the learner reads his explanations and then corrects the written text, and then he consults or she consults with a peer and then rewrites the text like this. Yesterday, the man panicked. There's a C, must have a K. When he saw, not when he see, using the past tense, was too little time left. Okay, to, all right, not to. And in this way, they get the sentence right and they can consult with their friends. And this is how they can see the application of the rule. And it's not just done with me learning the rule verbatim. How to ensure learners are ready to learn. Ensure that your learning outcomes and your activities are achievable for them. It's fun to learn. They must want to learn. It must be fun to learn. Help learners to understand what they need to learn, how you're going to scaffold them and you're going to mediate them so they know how to understand what they need to learn. Relate it to their lives. Don't make things that are so dissimilar to what they're experiencing. Let it be about things they understand. So relate to that. Then you can also build up into the I+1. So structure the learning so they experience initial success. They understand what COVID is and the effect on schooling, but then we can move to vaccines and other things. And this will develop a positive attitude to learning. So let them accomplish something and gain success. And then they'll be joyful and happy. Deliberately make learning interesting. So related to their context, it must be relevant. They must know what you're talking about, but it must also be enjoyable. They must enjoy doing that. There must be a sense of success, but also a bit of challenging to extend them into the next level as well. This is an example from a school I was attending in the northern areas. These were lyrics to a song. This was the build on to the lesson to see which figures of speech, I think it was. I think there might have been doing alliteration, how it was used in the lyrics of the song. And there you can see the teacher scaffolding and helping them. You can see all the groups working along, looking at their own lyrics, and this is encouraging something that's pleasurable because it's about songs and music, and they enjoy doing this, and plus they're learning about alliteration at the same time. So how do we ensure that learners are ready to learn? So use activities that provoke curiosity in them, things they're going to find interesting, like bullying perhaps, or drug use, gender-based violence they might find interesting. So they want to ask, why did this happen? How did this happen? What if this happened? So these are all kinds of contexts that you can use. Why are some people not wanting to be vaccinated? How did this happen? What happened with the uprisings? Why? Was it good? Let's just challenge them to think about things. Give them joy in learning, things that they're interested in. Don't let it all be about tests and exams. How are we going to assess this? That's not what learning is all about. Consider their knowledge, their skills, and their attitudes that they have when they come to the classroom. They're not isolated from their homes, from their ways of life, their socioeconomic situations. So consider all that when you plan your lessons. And then develop an understanding of concepts and principles rather than recalling this information or development of routine skills. So this is quite interesting. Yeah, we've got a cartoon and the teacher says, hello, students, let's start our lesson. Okay, this is what you all do, like your question part. She will make us repeat again and again. So are you a teacher that makes them repeat all the time? So she says, frame 2, repeat 10 times. The different food tastes. Okay, so obviously they've had to repeat this often. And there they go. Salty, sweet, bitter, sour, salty, sweet, bitter, sour, repetition. Do you think that's fun? Is that not extending them? It's not. It's keeping them trapped in a paradigm of rules, which we so often do. Also consider their different cultural backgrounds, the linguistic backgrounds, and try and bring this into the lesson to bring them into the area where they feel comfortable, which they know and they can extend as well. This is the same school I was at, and now you can see the different cultures within the class. You can see the Muslim kids, you can see the colored kids, you can see the black kids, and they're all mixing, they're all integrating. You can see this very naughty boy there in the front. He just didn't want to settle. Some of them have got books in front of them, some of them haven't. So you actually see there's lots of differences in diversity, but the teacher eventually got them all together. This is still the alliteration lesson, and they look like they're quite happy, except in the one looking back all the time, and they look like they're taking in the content too. So text-based approaches for language learning and teaching are important. What types of media could you use in your language class? Books, cartoons, any kind of text that you want to use, songs, lyrics. Those are the media that you can use. You can use, I'm trying to think of, you can use telephones, you can use digital media, you can use advertising, billboards, the different kinds of texts from songs to visual you can use. What visual material could you use? Images, advertisements, cartoons. And then to consider for each of them, the purpose and the audience that is applicable to this Toyota, Coca-Cola ad at the Toyota games as well. What was the purpose of that ad for Coca-Cola? What was the audience for that advertisement as well? So you can consider those things too. So you've got to mediate learning and scaffolding. That means you've got to help them, you've got to support and guide them. You've got to give them examples of paragraphs, keywords, tenses, yes. Preferably in a text. You must ask questions. They must ask questions. You can give them templates to understand it. You can give them criteria for understanding things, show them how to classify details, find key points, make lists, read instructions, scheming and scanning strategies. So these are all ways that you can actually mediate and help your students. And here I've got a little thing added. What strategies could you teach learners to develop apostrophe use? Most difficult part of language is often the apostrophe use. What strategies could you give them? Verb agreement, that I should not say I is, you say I am, okay? What about direct speech, indirect speech? What if you think about one grammar focused concept, okay? Passive voice, active voice, indirect speech. What 3 kinds of texts could you use to promote, say, direct speech? Maybe a dialogue, maybe an advertisement, maybe a book. So what kind of work could you use if you want to bring in the idea of direct or indirect speech? Newspapers, wonderful example as well. So what's next? My last slide, happy days. Language acquisition, this is for, especially for our second language students, does not require extensive use of conscious grammar rules. Okay, just remember that they don't have to know the rules, okay, and does not require tedious drill. That means they've got to repeat after me all the time. So just remember that, get that out of your repertoire for language teaching. No conscious grammar rules or tedious drills. Okay, prioritize fun in your classroom and the learning will come as well. So that brings me to the end of today's lecture. Hope you're all doing well. There will be an online tracking quiz for this. For those of you that want me to upload PowerPoints without pictures, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. It's up to you if you want to get rid of all the pictures, just do it. So you've got the notes, but I'm not going to pick them off and send you clean PowerPoints. I think if you want the PowerPoints, you just have to decode and delete all the pictures. Okay, so have a good evening. I'll chat to you next week. Try and get the Kahoot done. Tomorrow you've got the Menti will finish, and then you've got, I think, till the next Sunday, which is the 22nd of August, to complete the online tracking. Okay, let's do this. We can do it. Chat later, and stay safe and stay warm. Okay, bye.